Hi guys, welcome to the second part of the auction preview. In this video, we're gonna review two lots that Ranjan picked that are based in Islington. One is a piece of land in the also auction, and the other one is a mid-terrace mixed-use property also in the also auction. So enjoy the discussion. Let's look at this land in Angel. Is that the one?
Yep, that's the one. Let me just get it up on my screen. 97, isn't it?
That is a
Interesting.
big piece of land.
Sorry?
That is a big piece of land.
It's not bad. I mean, normally these sort of small sites are a little bit smaller than that. It's obviously in a cracking area, being in N1 Angel, London. So it's very close to the Angel Silicon Roundabout and all the startup action that's going there. Now, the interesting thing is that there's been a new London plan, which basically sets planning policy for everything that goes on in the London boroughs. And there is now a sort of a drive to favour infill developments. So this is a full planning permission to redevelop this site. You've got lovely amount of space there. You're also in an area where basement development actually makes sense. The cost per square foot to build a basement and the cost and the price per square foot of the NGDV, it actually makes economic sense to go down if you have a trouble with building upwards. And the site is large enough to meet all the amenity standards and that kind of stuff. So with the London plan now favouring infill developments, this is a quite a nice little cheeky scheme. The proposition would be to just buy it, chuck in some professional fees for actually getting a scheme through planning on this, and flip it on with permission. A site like this should yield at least 250k with planning permission.
Well, this is an interesting site, and there's a couple of things that draw my eye instantly. So when you say potential to go down a floor, I wouldn't disagree with that, because it looks like the site needs leveling anyway. So if you're going to be pulling out a couple of ton of rubble and mess, you may as well be digging deep enough for a basement.
Exactly.
The lighting in an enclosed site like that, natural light for a basement flat or basement area of an infill of a house or whatever you're going to put on there, would be a concern. The fact that the site has to the front, it's got the police parking bays that run across the full extent of the entrance. I'd be interesting to see if you were, you probably wouldn't want off-street parking. But the good news is that most of those police vans have 24-hour kind of security cameras running on them. So maybe there's a little bit more security in having a dwelling there. But this is very interesting. Which local borough does this come under? Is it?
This would be Islington.
Islington. So you have the additional dwelling levy for that as well.
Yeah, that's a small site.
The other thing is just access for deliveries, work, skips, things like that.
That's tough on all these sort of sites. It really is. But I think this would be a site where it wouldn't be a car parking type of site. It'll be a non-car kind of scheme. I think that's the only way that would work in that location.
So this is being sold by National Grid, and also they secured provisions for an overage, which usually apply to sales like this, like the more like what do you call them, anti-embarrassment clauses?
Yeah.
Yes.
What is the overage?
Now that obviously can kick the whole thing.
Yeah.
CPSC, official site check, common land and something, whatever contract, factual desktop study. Well, let's look at special conditions because I guess that will
Yeah.
reveal something.
So for folks watching, I guess the overage basically means that if you get planning permission on the site, you have to pay a percentage to the national grid. The issue with overage is not so much how much. I mean, you just have to factor that into the figures. But the issue is the timing at when that overage payment is due, because often the wording is such, it says you have to pay the overage amount to the national grid at the time you get the permission. Now, the question is the trigger for payment in sync with a cash inflow that you get? I mean, you normally get cash when you sell the site. You don't get cash in when you get permission. That can be a massive issue with overage, meaning the trigger to pay the overage doesn't correspond with a trigger where you actually get money into the project.
The other thing you find is actually, these used to be called clawback provisions, and it was tidied up to overage, and now it's been PC 13 to anti-embarrassment clauses. The thing with those things is that they're normally poorly drafted, which can sometimes make them very difficult to enforce. So I think if you are looking at a site, this one or another, and it has a clawback or an overage or an anti-embarrassment clause, whatever way it's written, is that you get that clause sense checked by a solicitor to say, look, what does this mean? How is it enforced? Is it enforceable? Is it specific enough? Because actually, if they're not specific enough, they're very, very difficult to enforce.
Okay, so there's a VAT applicable to this sale, and we get into this additional provisions, definition, environmental law, harm, blah blah. Reports, retain land, statutory guidance, transfer. Wow, that is a lot of conditions. The provisions of this clause.
This is, of course, one of these freeholds which you would have to get checked by a solicitor. There's a huge amount here.
100%. The word control, contact. 50% of voting rights. What is deed of covenant, development, any works? Okay, development base value, the base price. So I think over 10 years overage period, and the trigger is grant of the development permission or the implementation of the relevant change of use, and the disposal value, overage the sale, overage period, overage property, but there must be percentage, right? Getting there.
This looks like a very well drafted overage clause.
Yeah,
Overage sum equal to 50% of the amount by which the disposal value exceeds the base price of payment to be made on the completion of the relevant disposal or change of control.
Oh, that's good. That's actually good.
Yes, and there's the development overage equals 25% amount. Okay, well, it's a very well drafted overage kind of provision document. And so I guess that's something to be taken into account. And I just wonder if I'll definitely want this checked by a really good solicitor, and I'll definitely want them to be aware of all the extra charges that Islington adds on top of the kind of planning permission that are granted for new residential units, which is 50k per unit, because that should be within the base price or within the cost or whatever that it should affect the overage price. And but I think this is gonna go crazy this site. I think very few people are gonna read the special conditions. I think very few people is actually gonna take legal advice on this, and this will sell something like 200, 250.
I don't think it'll sell for as much as that. Maybe without the overage, but certainly not.
You underestimate auction buyers, Raj.
What would be your price, Ranjan? What would be if Mr. Bhattacharya could pick this up tomorrow? What's the price?
To be honest with you, when I actually looked through this, I didn't spot the clawback provision, so that upsets me a little bit. And
Price just dropped by 100k.
Sorry?
The price just dropped by 100k.
Yeah, of course it does. The price drops dramatically. There's so little you can do with it. It's a lovely site.
That is exactly the reason why this site is going to sell for 250. If someone like Ranjan Bhattacharya doesn't spot the clause there. So
all right.
what would be your price now, given that you've seen the clause and what would be your price now you're aware of the clause and everything else?
It's difficult to say without wading through that overage clause. But I actually don't think it's if the overage clause is really well drafted and it's in the 50% order, I don't think it's worth that much above guide.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of moving parts to deal with the national grid. In my view, I think it's a bit naive. They should have just let it go and let the market decide who's going to pay what for it. Because I think they would have got more for it if they didn't have that provision.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah, same, likewise. But I think they're still going to get a lot of money. By the way, that South Kensington flat that we're talking about, 11 months on the lease, sold for 140,000 pounds. Insane. Obviously, it didn't.
It's conveniently back on the market again, or inconveniently.
That's right, yeah. But I think this one is going to sell for the same price as it would sell without the overage provisions, because the person who's going to buy this won't read the contract.
So we're looking at lot 104 in London, in N7 in Islington, and it's a freehold mixed-use building comprising of a William Hill. It's only half the William Hill. You're buying the building with the mansard sort of roof, and it has 3 flats above. Now I think this will be attractive for a certain type of investor. What we are about to see is, once lockdown is lifted, it's of course a recoil effect in London. London will bounce back very, very strongly because London is London. It's been London for, it's a major world capital, and as soon as lockdown is restricted, we'll see much more activity in the central zone. This location is sort of fabulous, and the other thing with residential property in London is you do benefit from capital appreciation. Capital appreciation is likely to be quite strong in London over the coming years, not only because of the inflationary pressures of all this currency printing, but well, that's the main issue really, because with so much currency printing, there's going to be an asset price bubble. So London has always been a good bet for that. But the interesting thing is, London residential yields for buy-to-let residential property, although you get great capital appreciation, the yields in recent years have been very, very low. And one of the ways of getting decent net yields in London is to go freehold, is to go multi-unit, and is to go mixed use. Because you tend to find blended yield in a building like this is far higher than if it was just purely residential. And I know it's quoted in there as being, 6.7 or something percent, but sorry, 6.5%. I think it'll go for hovering around the 6 or very high 5s in terms of yield, because of the commercial element. A lot of some strictly residential investors may be put off, but it's a good capital growth play in the short term, and it's a upper end of the residential yields that you can expect in London.
Yeah, and do you think that William Hill will continue, given that the oil
Um,
5 years to lease holding over? I think it looks likely.
well, yes, I mean it's a very good point about the betting shop. You've got to have a look at the betting shops and where they are with the store closure program, and you'll find that particularly companies like William Hill, they've done their store closing now. They've pretty much done it. So it's likely that it would be okay. But in these sort of areas, you've got to look at the local vibe, you've got to look at the local street scene, the local vacancy rate, and we have commercial units all around this area, and there is always seems to be a very, very strong market to let these things.
That's right. Yeah, I live close by to this place, and I do shop in the corner uh, juice place, and I like this area.
I was going to say I place my bets daily in the.
When Piotr visits his London holiday home, that's where he shops. Yeah. I think the thing for me is I agree with your points about the blended yield. If you're going to buy London resi, this is a good capital appreciation area. So when the value returns back to London, it's going to do well. The covenant on the commercial, I don't think betting shops carry the same kind of class value that they used to. I think there were some dynamic changes to the way they had to run betting machines and things like that, or even remove betting machines, which impacted their turnover, which impacts their viability over the long term. But in reality, there's already a William Hill there. If it's two separate shops, and this one is holding over, I would be quite confident in getting that relet to somebody else, maybe a tidier covenant. But yeah, it's a stoic bit of London kit.
And the rental income isn't that high. So remember, we're looking at the a laundry shop, which is right opposite, and I think it was a year ago, a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And that one was producing about £18,000 per annum. So 14k isn't overinflated.
Yes, I mean Jay's point is absolutely spot on, because of course back in the old days these people were thought of as great covenants, and now they're not so. So that meant that landlords would have them in at a lower rent than they would accept from someone else. But now they're not. They don't have that covenant status anymore. If they were to go, you would get a higher rent from someone else. Betting shops are always paying at the lower end of any parade, of any rents and parades. You tend to find that they're locked in some of the lower rent.
And what inspires me with confidence is the fact that all the flats were let in the kind of the lockdown period, basically, or the COVID period. So fairly recently, a few months ago.
Yeah, the rental market is a little bit strange in that area. It seems to have been severely affected for things like studios and shared space. But where there's a discrete small flat, because I guess people want to be on their own and all of that, not share and COVID risk, that side of the market seems to have fared up quite well. And the flats are reasonably tidy inside. Maybe you can service accommodation action in their possibilities with the location, the fit out.
I like it. I think it's a good total returns kind of play over a long period as well. I think rents will continue to go up in that area for residential. I think also the other thing about betting shops is they're not that desirable to live above. So when you get it out, you often find there's a bit more demand for the flats above it as well. I think there's that's only going to do better over the next few years, and so yeah, good, decent buy at that price.
That's another very good point, Rod. They do. I mean, if you get the betting shop out, you'd get more rent for the ground floor, but I don't think you'd increase the rental value of the upstairs, because I find renters don't really care. but it would certainly do a lot for the capital value. I mean, if you've got a sort of, little service sector type place, choose bar or something like that, that's not like a betting shop, it will certainly do well for the capital value if that's about.
I think Rod's point is also genuine insofar as even if the rent hasn't increased, your ability to re-let the residential in a shorter period of time is certainly greater.
It's the total returns from lack of voids, lack of kind of all that sort of stuff that really does help. And in that area, you've got other opportunities if you wanted to trade on those flats and split them up into individual leases and things like that. So yeah, I think that sort of thing is a sensible buy, far over kind of where, I don't know, you look in the north at a similar building, the big difference you've got there is the values. So although the yields might be lower, the values are higher. And then when you start to look at operational kind of costs as a percentage of the rent roll, it's very minimal and doesn't eat into your profits nearly as much over a long term in somewhere like Holloway Road in London versus, I don't know, somewhere up north.
We don't call it that much Holloway Road because it's York Way. It's
Sorry.
like Camden Road. They call it Holloway in there, but I would call it more Camden. Like,
yeah,
that would be Camden.
Yeah, I mean, it's on the south side, so it's much more, walking distance to King's Cross and all of that. I mean, of course, anyone buying this property will need to do a little bit of due diligence, make sure that the rent's being paid, make sure that the rents are up to date. They probably will be from William Hill, but make sure the rents are up to date from the flats above, because if they're not, then you as the incoming buyer would have to pay any shortfall in those rents. And also make sure you've got all the paperwork that the previous landlord should have served on the residential tenants prior to letting them, because that will affect your ability to get them out. And of course, do a double check to make sure you're comfortable that the rents being achieved on the residentials are sensible and it's not over rented, which can be a problem, or under rented, which creates an opportunity.
That's right. Well, I think it's a really decent asset. I think it's going to sell well.